Great to be here. A couple of introductions and some context for the discussion. I'm Rob Ambrose, the co-founder and managing director of Caretta Research. We focus on the media technology industry based out of Europe, and we spend a lot of time talking to technology buyers and decision makers about the choices they make and the strategies that they pursue. And the perennial question that comes up all the time is, should we buy or should we build, or what's the right combination of that? And I think that's never more common than when we're talking about online streaming and online video platforms. So we've been working with Caretta, and great to be joined by Nuno Sanchez, who's the general manager for media and telecoms at Kaltura. We've published a report this morning called The Secrets of Streaming Success, which is based on all of those conversations we've had with platforms and operators. We were going to put the download link on the slide, but we realized that would be very long. So I've checked. You can just search for Secrets of Streaming Success Kaltura, and that's the easiest way to find it. So we'll talk about some of the things that we found in that report as well, focusing on really the core operational strategies that we found underpin the successful strategies. You all know what a competitive market it is out there for streaming. We've seen, of course, in the last week that even the biggest players are perhaps having a reset in terms of their growth. So there are certain common themes that underpin those successful strategies. So that's what's covered in the report, and today we're going to focus really on the technology response to that and how to do that. So Nuno, obviously at Kaltura, you're involved in working with many platforms and service providers. Just tell us a little bit more about your role there to kick us off.
Of course. So first of all, Robert, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and thanks to the audience for your time. So I run the business, the media and telecom business in Kaltura. Kaltura is an horizontal video provider that aims to pretty much cover any video experience for any organization in the world. We do that across multiple verticals, from education, financial services, tech, OEM services, and media and telecom, which is the business unit that I run. The media and telecom unit specializes in offering pay TV streaming platforms to operators and media companies. We have amongst our customer list some of the largest telecom companies in the world, and in our media customers, some of the most successful and fastest growing media companies globally, from APAC to the US, with a strong foothold in Europe. And we were sort of ahead of the curve in understanding pretty much that three dynamics would shape the market. The first one was that public cloud would be the defining infrastructure mechanism to deliver operator-grade services. The second was that OTT and OTT architectures would actually win the distribution wars and become the default mechanism that they could co-live with more traditional distribution methods. And the third element would be that super aggregation would become the defining element for anyone distributing third-party content into the direct-to-consumer world. And those three convergence trends sort of allowed us to have a set of products and services that have enabled this sort of large spectrum of customers to be quite competitive and have a set of direct-to-consumer services that are second to none in the markets where they operate.
So I mentioned at Caretta Research, when we're talking to streaming services and platforms and buyers, we really try to look at what people have actually done rather than what they say they might do. So we spend a lot of time looking at what technology solutions people have actually deployed for different applications. And I think we've seen these two models emerging where there are some that we speak to that have pretty much built everything in-house and want that degree of control. And then there's some who have gone to a turnkey provider or a white label provider and basically taken everything in the box. Is it still that sort of binary choice in terms of the technology approaches?
So I think we still see a lot of people that at the start of their journey, they see it as binary. We got into a lot of conversations of, I'm not sure if I'm going to build a team to do this, if I'm going to buy a small team, a small company and make it my internal shop, or if I want to outsource this to a vendor. And I find that the binary element of it, it's quite artificial. So that what we advise most of our customers is ultimately to figure out where they want to compete, what are the variables that matter for them, and keep a very tight level of control over those. And they're very different from customer to customer. If you're the only one selling Vietnamese content in the US, you're less worried about user experience and more about segmentation, engagement, and acquisition. If you're a very large media provider who wants to be at parity with Disney and HBO and Netflix, user experience would be a critical element you want to control. So what that differentiating element is changes a lot. But at this point, it's hard for me to imagine that anyone wanted to start this business and with the urgency of capturing market share and that would really engage in a let's build from scratch strategy where they need to figure out sort of the nuts and bolts of infrastructure, scalability, reliability, and just get the basic stuff right, which from my experience can be a half a decade journey. 2 to 3 years if you're investing and have the talent, 5 years if you're limited in investment or you prefer to put your chips in content, which tends to be where most of our clients and partners tend to prefer investing.
Some of the platforms I've spoken to have pretty much made a mistake on their technology strategy. So they've perhaps chosen an OVP, an online video platform, a technology provider, perhaps one that's promising the world in terms of a turnkey service or a white label service. And what they find is that they kind of pretty much hit the limits of that. There was one service we spoke to in Latin America who literally had to switch platforms because they needed to serve a particular smart TV platform in Brazil that wasn't one of the common ones, and that couldn't be supported by their existing provider. And I think that experience can make people nervous and send them down the build it themselves. We need to control it all approach. So how can people buy into a technology platform on the one hand, but not kind of get locked into those mistakes on the other?
I think there's a sweet spot that's relatively hard to get to, and I think most technology providers who position themselves in rather the extreme sides of we're a service, mostly a service company who can build whatever you want, or a fully productized company that you essentially get into a relation with us or with a credit card and you're completely stuck into what we're offering. And what we see is that both extremes have significant downsides. In one, you're essentially getting yourself into an open-ended investment model with no guarantees of having any sort of maturity and roadmap, and there's simply no economic model typically to get to where you want to get if you're investing by yourself to just reinventing the wheel at every single feature set. On the other extreme, what we see is that the decision that seemed to make sense when you were aiming for 10,000 subscribers and you had zero capital to start with tends not to be the same one that you do when you're having 100,000 or 500,000 and you actually need to have the specific billing gateway integrations for each of your countries, or right to left languages, or support those kind of things that are not mainstream, but that could be the one element that in your new target market will just make you succeed. And because they're completely inflexible, you get stuck in the two extremes. And we see this, I think that until 2 to 3 years ago, it was quite obvious that everyone was falling into this trap. And what we're seeing now is that people realize that you need to be at the same time in a product approach where everything that is, let's call it not just hygienic, but the baseline of what you need to do, it needs to work. It needs to be scalable, reliable, it cannot break down. It needs to be economical to scale. It needs to offer all the core feature set that allow you to essentially sort of meet the Jones in terms of functionality and user expectations. But then it needs to be extendable and have the flexibility, and this typically means platformic approaches, open APIs, it means integration mechanisms and service models that are actionable without enormous investment that just allow you to plug the extra pieces that are unique to you and that allow you to essentially unlock your segment or geography or a specific business need. And this might sound like a relatively obvious statement, but when you look at the portfolio of most technology providers, they would sort of define themselves almost exclusively one of the two extremes. And that's where I think Kaltura particularly is focused on serving this sort of being able to start small and grow, not just in scale, but also in complexity of needs with a product, but also at the same time allow any kind of future complex customization to come on board and enable success.
I think we also see that modularity as being important, and I think for several reasons, actually. Firstly, from what you've said, it avoids getting trapped, and it keeps the flexibility. The market is developing quickly, new features and new expectations come along. So I think whatever approach anyone takes between build versus buy and where the blend is, they've got to think about how they quickly respond to those changing consumer expectations. You see the platforms offering the best user experience, offering the ability to skip the intro and skip the credits on content to support the binge watching. That's quite complicated to do, and I think that's where people start to struggle to compete. But the other thing we see is that it also is a way of keeping the technology teams internally on board with the process, because they sometimes fear, I think, being squeezed out in the process and can want to build themselves. But the question then is, if you say that you're going to extend a platform or you're going to build on top of it, which bits should you build in-house? Which is the right components to take and give to the in-house engineering team, and which are the right components to buy in from somebody that's developed that over a period of time?
So I think the answer of what you shouldn't be building, it's much easier to give than what you should be building. Because what you shouldn't be building, usually the answer is generic and common globally across all of our customer base, for example, which is you should not be worrying about how to build scalable infrastructure that can, in a cost-efficient way, deliver to millions of subscribers, or start doing that efficiently at tens of thousands scale, but be able to robustly grow to millions. And sometimes, as you all know, growing not in this sort of highly predictable traditional fashion, but with this sort of peaks and bumps and drops that so well define the sort of commercial success associated to blockbuster models, to the final day of Big Brother in a billion-plus people country like we've been exposed to. So being able to sort of benefit from this ability, be sure to benefit from a platform that matches your expectations, or it simply always works. It simply always streams. It simply always streams with quality. And on top of that, and that is the foundational layer, but then there are a lot of things that you might think are specific to you and have been well tested. I'll give the example of the transition that we're seeing from models of subscription to AVOD in the US and Western Europe. That model has been in place in APAC for half a decade now. There's a significant work being done in Kaltura particularly, but by other technology providers present in the region, where the business models that are the cutting edge in one geography have actually been quite mature in other ones. This is no different from what happened with mobile phones a few years ago, for example, where you'd see that Korea or Japan would be half a decade ahead in some of the business models. And the same is true in reverse. So from one geography to the other. So I would say that on the business model perspective, usually the innovation comes from countries that have struggled more with ARPU. So you'd see things that are now being requested in advanced pay TV markets that were actually initiated, some of them in Africa, some of them in APAC, because the need to bring the most out of the value potential was first explored there. So the things you shouldn't do, I would say, are all those that fit into there's a global demand for that capability. The things you should do are very specific to each of your market, or you should consider doing internally. If there is a very specific capability that to unlock your market, let's say a Middle Eastern market where you need to be able to onboard specific catalogs that are very specific to your market, and they have different metadata sets that don't have any characteristic, or some business model that is so unique to your market. I'm thinking about, I've seen in some countries where you tag along data consumption with video time, and you sell the data package and the video consumption goes. Those are not global products. Those are not products that anyone is actively developing upon, but they might be the key element to success in your specific business opportunity. We've had customers who essentially are very keen on upselling plush toys with their kids' apps. So the business model is e-commerce on top of video, and that's the whole monetization mechanism, because they distribute through cable and access to the app is free, but then the monetization comes on plush toys, and you'd be surprised how much money you can make out of plush toys, just to be clear. If we're talking about SaaS services and selling video, I would rather be in the plush toy business from what I've seen from the margins those guys get on a Pokemon doll this size. So those kind of things are specific to you, and the key message here is it's not a technology discussion what you should build or buy, and that's typically the error that most people do when thinking through this. They treat this as a technological challenge. I would argue this is simply a business challenge where you need to define what's the relative importance of control to your success, and if the importance is high, and at the same time the standardization of that feature is low, that's where you should be building. And I understand it's less sexy for an engineering team to be building e-commerce integrations to sell plush toys than it is to be discussing the latest and greatest video streaming or infrastructure, but that's still the business need that needs to be responded to.
Yeah, I think we certainly see that the areas of differentiation that most commonly come up are around billing in a particular market. Individual countries all over the world have their own unique characteristics around billing. I mean, for example, in the Middle East, as you mentioned, credit cards are not generally used, and automatic renewal or repeating on credit cards are tricky. In the Netherlands, credit cards aren't used. They have a particular debit card that's used. In parts of Africa, there are services like M-Pay, which is driven by operators. So that's a common point, and I think needing to support particular platforms and aggregation in markets is also key. Now, one of the pushbacks we often hear from buyers when we're talking about are they going to build or buy is their concern about their sort of place on the roadmap. And I put this quote up on the screen. This came from one of our interviews, where if you know, from a buyer perspective, if the technology platform's doing okay, meeting most of the needs, maybe there's one new feature you need over time, but it's not worth switching platforms for. But over time, that builds up, and what buyers worry about is particularly if they're smaller, they may not be very influential over their tech supplier's roadmap. They may just think that the bigger customers are going to get all of their requests, and they're going to lose out being able to offer that plush toy integration for another 2 years. So how do you respond to that as a technology provider to assure them that they can get their stuff done?
So I haven't met a technology provider that would not want to respond to its customer needs if they were able to. So the way I see it, this is less of a discussion about how do I get positioned into the roadmap. It's more of a discussion of, does the technology provider have the underlying foundational mechanisms that allow them to innovate quickly, that allow them to reprioritize roadmaps, and above all, that allow them to deploy seamlessly into the specific customer environments. And the truth is that typically, when someone's frustrated about the roadmap, it's less so that I cannot get what I want into the roadmap, is that getting anything into the roadmap takes 2 years. So that tends to be the problem statement. The way we're addressing it, it's basically just enabling the platform from day one to essentially be an innovation acceleration mechanism, not just for our customers' purpose, but also for our own. We have no ambition of trying to know what 2 years into the roadmap can be, to tell you the truth. I think that those sort of exercise, when a customer asks us, show me a 2-year roadmap, it's usually like, it has 2 quarters and then it has 6 quarters of blank page. Because if I were to tell anyone, I know where the media, if we're sitting here 2 years ago and everyone would have, we would have fantasized about the state of the world and what makes sense in roadmaps, all of our dreams and expectations would have been dashed by being locked at home for 2 years in front of a screen and essentially having to worry about a completely different set of needs and priorities. So the way we are building it, and I think the way an answers to this, is you actually need to do 2 things. First of all is just the foundational elements, meaning you can have platforms that are deployed on a customer. That concept doesn't work. If you're doing anything on a per customer basis and not a per product basis, the customer will always feel this problem. And that it was true when it was on-prem and you had to have a 2-year upgrade cycle to do something that's now be branched out. But it's also exists if someone tells, I'm running in the cloud, but this platform is for you. So right now, I think the key answer to this is the way that we need to operate in pay TV is no different from the way you'd operate in Dropbox or you'd operate in any Google services, which is basically new features. All the customers are sitting in the same platform. They're multi-tenant or accounts in the same platform. Every time we push a feature, it's pushed the feature immediately from R&D into production for all of our customer base. They can choose to activate it or not. They can have the commercial frame that allows them to activate or not. But from a technological standpoint, innovation goes from the developer into production and can be immediately captured. If you have that in place, then the discussion is, do you have an agile model of work that just allows you to decide what you're going to do next month instead of allowing you to decide what you're going to do in the next 2 years? And that goes back just to how good you are at working with, I would say, small teams, agile teams that can shift direction quickly, and how much are you sort of focused in just having a very quick return cycle for your customer. But the first one is the one that really enables the second one. Because I've met a lot of technology providers and customers who build their internal teams, who've built agile teams and are very good at building the code you need in the next 2 weeks. Small teams, focused teams, you shift them, and then from that day to production, it essentially takes the same time it did when the teams were not agile. And that is where I think the big difference comes through. The second one is the business model. Historically, you paid for a platform. That platform sat in your data center. It has something to you, and everything you wanted had a commercial element attached to it. You had perpetual licenses. The incentives were not aligned. Right now, in a pure SaaS model like we're doing, essentially what you do is, your lifetime value is what we care about. So if we keep dropping features to you, you're going to stick around for longer. You're going to the chances of you moving to another service are smaller, the chances of you having more ARPU and being able to buy extra services and capacity from us increase. So that means that our incentives are aligned in the long term. So the concept of an orphan platform, which if you've been playing in the industry for some time, you know it's the defining problem of the industry, which is at the moment of setup, the promises are all magnific, and 6 months in, the promises start to disappear, and 2 years in, you're begging for someone to support you. That simply disappears in a SaaS-based model. So I see that this tension that's reflected here, it's mostly the tension we see with customers that made the decision to operate on what is de facto legacy model, where they wanted a lot of control. I want to have my data center, my applications, my engineers touching it, my integration, my high level of control, and then they start losing on the value elements of it because they were very high on the control scale, on the control parameter.
I put this quote up as well that's in the report that we did. This was from another conversation, which is, yeah, maybe in an ideal world, the platform would love to work with a technology partner who only has them to serve, or that they do it all in-house. But then the cost comes in, and I think cost is a twofold problem. Firstly, how much do you want to invest in the technology platform versus all of the other things that you need to do? We tend to see the successful platforms kind of ending up with a split of their costs between the content. You always want to allow enough budget for licensing content, the technology platform itself, both developing the platform and then the CDN and the streaming costs and the maintenance costs. And then the third bucket that people often forget about is the customer acquisition and marketing cost. And in many platforms, they kind of end up being about 3 equal slices of the investment. But I think those platforms that are doing all of that development up front, firstly, they're incurring a lot of capital cost in doing that they could be spending on content or marketing. And then secondly, they aren't easily able to align that investment with the revenue they're getting back from the service. And I think that model that you were talking about, where you have a satellite model, means that the cost of the technology is more aligned with the revenue that you're getting from that platform.
So absolutely. So that almost goes without saying. I think we used to live in a world where you'd have, and still today in conversation we have with customers, that's almost their default. Just yesterday we were having a conversation where the default model was sort of, the conversation goes as, we don't know if we're going to be successful, we're going to move for a monetization model based on AVOD, but the problem is we will incur 100% of the cost of setup for a given scale in day one, and if we fail, what happens? We need to write off all of this investment in time, human time, infrastructure, capital. So the product-based SaaS model and cloud-based SaaS model that we base our whole business in is basically one where we grow with our customers. If they succeed, because we don't carry any fixed costs, to be practical. So it's a product-based and it's a variable multi-tenant infrastructure. And what that allows us is to simply align incentives with us. Is if you don't want anything specific, you have no cost of entry. You can try it immediately if you scale. For every subscriber or stream, whatever the business model or CPM that you're using, we will take a fair portion of that represents our share of the success. But we're not getting rewarded without a success model. And I think that created, historically, that has not existed in this industry, and that created a lot of perverse incentives. Either you put a data center in place, put a platform, a 5-year maintenance contract, and 20 people working on this for 3 years just to keep the lights on, and the technology provider had captured 90% of their value. If the users then, if the customer succeeded or failed, that would make the difference between I don't know, 90 to 100%. It's a bit like real estate, right? So your real estate agent will get 5% of the value of your house, whether you get at market value or 10% above. So their incentives are not aligned. They don't want to sell your house. If they sell it at whatever price, they make their deal. And that's how this industry used to operate. Right now, it's not. We're a real estate agent that essentially just gets money if you get value above the market price. And I think that's the best way to look at it for the model we're putting through now. And it allows, honestly, fail and iterate faster, is take more risks. Don't spend 2 years debating with your board if you're going to launch a multi-million endeavor that might fail. Just launch it, try. And if you succeed, share a little bit of that value with us.
And just thinking about some of the topics that were in the rest of the report, actually, that time to market is something that we see as being so important. And particularly for newer platforms starting out, one of the huge challenges everyone has is they don't really know what requirements they have when they start out. So it can be difficult to build or indeed decide which technology partner to use because you don't quite know what you want to do. So it's often better just to get started with a good best-in-class platform figure out how that works in your market, and then iterate from there. Only really by going out to market can you test what the kind of content, what kind of business model is going to work. But the other thing in any sort of subscription model, or indeed an advertising model that's based on impressions, is every week that you haven't launched is revenue that you've lost that you're never getting back. That revenue is like the airline business. Once that plane takes off with an empty seat, that revenue is never going to the airline. And I think it's the same with streaming. If you're not in market earning subscriptions or selling ad impressions, then you're not earning revenue. And at the same time, there's more likelihood that a competitor will come in and do that. So I think rapid time to market is always one of the key measures to, it has a significant impact on the overall revenue success and the overall build of a platform. Some of the other operational strategies that we touched on in the report, I'll just kind of run through the top 5 things that we found. Maximizing distribution and reach is crucial. We live in a super aggregation world now where working with distribution partners is critical to any streaming service, including the very biggest ones. That means getting apps onto the smart TV platforms, onto the mobile devices, onto the pay TV operator platforms in each of the markets that you want to address. That's a mix of proprietary platforms and existing smart TV and streaming stick platforms. But I think whenever I have a conversation with an operator or streaming service, their number one engineering pain point is getting apps to work on multiple platforms. So a strategy that addresses that, and I don't know how you would respond to that at Kaltura, but a strategy that means you can get your apps out onto all those platforms becomes key.
So absolutely. I think one of the biggest reasons to essentially leverage a vendor that has more than one, that essentially is the pile-up effect of multiple customers. So there's so many industry-wide problems. I would say smart TV compatibility is one of them, a relevant one that engineering teams are very exposed to because it's very visible to the customer. I would argue that problem solving, the scalability problem in public cloud could be another one. These are problems that are not in any way specific to you. If you embark on investing your own capital investment without diluting it through a wide debate, you're simply not doing the best to your investors because you're essentially trying to tackle a complex technological problem that's best served if it's solved in a distributed model. So when we guarantee that our player works in pretty much every device in the world, and from what we look at, every device in the world sort of means there's X devices in the whole world and there's an equal amount of X devices just in China and India in terms of complexity with the low end. So this is an effort that is an Herculean effort. And the only way we can fund it is because we're spreading this effort across 100 customers that are using the same exact technology set. It is, I think, the perfect example of if you are the investor and faced with the decision where should you put your money, this is the perfect example of where you should not be investing. Because this is not a problem for you to solve. This is a problem that has no specificity to you whatsoever. On the flip side, I've seen extreme cases where a specific smart TV model exists only in one market. I'm thinking about Turkey, for example, where Vestel has a huge market share, and they sometimes test models and chipsets that they don't distribute to work globally afterwards. I'm thinking about Brazil, where because of import restrictions, they have a lot of homegrown brands that essentially are assemblers. Those are combination of services that do not exist anywhere in the world. You will not find any scale. So that can fit then into that exceptions we were talking before of if it's critical for your market to compete on those platforms, you should invest on that. Yeah. But it has an exception and not has the rule.
So that first topic, distribution and reach, perennial challenge. The operators that are having success are the ones that address that effectively and maximize the number of platforms and devices that they reach. The second topic that we see, I guess it's a somewhat obvious one around delivering a great user experience. I mean, we would all think that surely everybody has this sort of aspiration to deliver the Netflix-like experience. And yet so many streaming platforms around the world that I use, and whenever I'm speaking to them, I will always give them a tryout. So many of them would have such a dreadful user experience that just doesn't understand, it seems, the most basic steps of engaging with a direct-to-consumer model. And I think that can be the risk of those that do some of that development in-house or don't pick the right technology provider. So many simple missteps that just lead to the drop-off of customers before they've even come. So many platforms I've seen that you can't even see the subscription price until you've entered your email address. This is just missing the basic rules of consumer services. The third topic is the importance of customer acquisition and engagement, actually very closely related to that. A lot of streaming services have been launched by existing media companies and content owners who, as we all know, have been historically a B2B business. They license their content to other people. It requires a new mindset to engage directly with consumers. It requires different people in the team. It requires people with marketing funnel expertise, experience of customer acquisition, and experience of using the analytics to detect the very specific behaviors of consumers. For example, we spoke with one platform and they said that consumers who, during a trial period, use the service on more than one device. So if they're not just using it on the mobile phone, but also on a smart TV device, they're far more likely to convert to being a paying customer. So you need the understanding of that user journey and the analytics to pick on that stuff, and that needs to feed back through a loop back into the marketing domain. So if a user hasn't engaged on more than one platform, you could send them a follow-up to say, why not try the smart TV app? That sort of mindset and allocating enough budget and enough expertise to that is something that often gets overlooked, I think. The fourth point that we saw, and that touches on what you were talking about, Nuno, is the importance of flexibility in the business models. There's no right and wrong answer between full subscription or full advertising and everything in between. It's very much dependent on the market and the business model that people want to pursue. But what we do see is people often want to change that business model. And we've spoken with a number of platforms where either they are locked into a business model because their technology provider doesn't support the choice they want to make. They've maybe started off with subscriptions and want to go hybrid, or they maybe started off with AVOD and want to go fast, or they may want to do some completely different subscription model altogether that's emerging. They get stuck on the technology platform. So that's an area where flexibility to be able to respond to any of those models is key. Anything with advertising involved needs a huge flexibility on the ad tech stack that plugs in. And then the final point is the successful platforms are those that are agile and flexible in their technology approach. Whatever their position on the buy versus build spectrum, they're the ones that focus on time to market and make sure that they deliver. So those are the sort of success factors that we highlight in the report. We'll take some questions in a minute, but just from a Kaltura point of view, when you think about those priorities, are you sort of seeing the same thing with the customers that you're working with, and how are you responding to those strategies?
Yeah, we see quite a few of those, and I think that's the sort of thought line that guides most of our product development element. I'll touch on the user experience, for example. One of the things that has been exceedingly hard to do for pretty much anyone in the value chain when they tend to try to do something that is not part of their scope. So if you're a technology company and you now need to develop a user UX, you will completely fail to understand what the variables even are. But that's not just true of that. So that's true of if you're a content provider and your historical key success factor was to develop blockbuster content and promote it adequately. That was your key success. Now your key success factor is to actually do digital customer acquisition, which is a skill set that has absolutely no correlation whatsoever with building and licensing content. It exists in a different domain with people of even different generations, mindsets, and backgrounds. So the way we figure out, and I think that the very successful players, any place in the chain, either they are the ones who are going direct to consumer, or who have successful B2B strategies, or who are, as ourselves, content providers, is when you recognize this blind spot from day one, and you decide that instead of falling into your own traps, that you're actually able to solve. So I've seen direct-to-consumer teams, for example, who went and got some very experienced TV engineer to lead their engineering. And for the next year and a half, they spent time discussing what was the best encoding and technology and video delivery mechanism. And at the point, they had this absolutely fantastic video delivery mechanism, and they had spent zero time integrating with marketing, engagement, and user acquisition tools. They launched, and the result was the expected one, was if you were one of the very few subscribers they managed to get to, your image quality was perfect. So, and that just speaks to a hammer, every problem is a nail. So if you're in your comfort zone and you don't recognize your value chain is being disrupted, you're going to do the stuff you used to do very well. What we've done, for example, in Kaltura is we've been historically a back-end provider, a platform provider. So we are at the core of our identity, an API company that builds Lego pieces and then reuses them as much as we can in different industry verticals, to which we then build additional layers that leverage on those APIs. And we are an API specialist. We recognized where the market was going, that to expand our full vision for media and telecom specifically, we needed to control the user interface. Because we felt the world had been dominated by people who wanted to control of the user interface. Going back to my previous point about the importance of control was, and my background is in telco, I've run large teams developing front ends, that was what you wanted to control. You wanted to control the identity, the brand, the journey, the experience. But then the journey and the experience sort of got standardized by the massive SWOT players. And now what everyone wants is to just essentially be unmatched with the expectations set there. So when we realized that people no longer wanted to control this, we felt the immediate need to be able to offer that to them as a product. But we recognized the blind spot. We didn't have anyone in the company who had absolutely any clue about how to design a user interface. And if we sat down and tried to sort of get it on by ourselves, we would miserably fail. And the approach was we needed to do two things. First is onboard the kind of talent that has direct-to-consumer experience, which are different animals than the one you have on your company right now. They think differently. They think about the consumer, which for a B2B business to bring B2C people, it's already a complex sort of adjustment and onboarding. And the second one is you never build it alone. We haven't built a single massive product without having a customer that's guiding us hand by hand and is testing it in the market through MVP journeys, through launching and correction. And when we make it general available, that is not the first iteration of something that came out of the basement of the brains that we locked in there to think through. It's something that we tried in the market with people who have real commercial experience. So that's just one of the ways we would answer some of those challenges. Some of the others just reflect back to the previous points, which are ultimately the not reinventing the wheel is our whole the whole paradigm, how we operate. We use it downwards to our customers, but also northbound with our own choice of partners. Right now, we do not invest in anything that we could leverage public cloud services for. It just doesn't make any sense. We're not going to do it better than Amazon does. So in our particular case, it was our preferred partner. So we concentrate our own effort in the things we can differentiate. So we sort of eat our own dog food in this kind of philosophy. And I think that sort of applies to this sort of the fact that we try to effectively match most of the conclusions that you've seen and the trends that you've seen in how to do this. The last one I wanted to mention is just the agile part, and it goes back to our platform approach and APIs, which is it's very hard for a company to be two things at the same time. It's hard for you to be a final end-to-end white label end-to-end product and to be an API company. I think very few companies have excelled in that, and the companies who have excelled are typically the Silicon Valley giants that come to mind immediately. And that is sort of an advice I have, not so much for customers looking to buy or to build, but even for people who are starting their own startups or their own businesses in this space, is the decision between being a platform or being a product is intrinsically an artificial one, in my view. Mm-hmm. So the market, the opportunities are so complex and so hard to explore right now that if you're starting a recommendation engine, if you're starting an AI company or data analytics, or if you're trying to pitch to your customers, and we have this large ecosystem of partners, you want to make sure that you have a platformic approach with APIs that can be used for use cases and you essentially can leverage the ecosystem to scale up. And at the same time, you want to make sure for the people who absolutely do not want any of that complexity, they just want to capture the benefits going to market, that you have a very clean product that materializes it. And that also works when you're building things internally. Because when you're building things internally, if you decided to build, a specific gateway for just build it in a way that as you would do if you were to be a technology provider. Don't solve your immediate problem, solve the generic business need. The problem is, let's say, you cannot support M-Pesa money in Kenya. That's not really the problem you're trying to solve. It's not integrate with M-Pesa. What you're trying to solve is, how can my product be able to serve any payment gateway in any currency, in any market I might operate? And from the moment you operate like that in the way you think about building products, which is how we do, you essentially move from the specificities of that specific challenge to sort of a future-looking, elastic model, agile model to build new capabilities.
Great. So we've got a few minutes left. So your chance to put us on the spot with tricky questions. If you'd like to sort of debate anything we've talked about, or ask a specific question about the research that we've done, or the Kaltura platform, there's a couple of microphones going around. So yeah, pop your hand up and ask away.
Hey, so one of the things that you're talking about is what are these components that you should invest in, and what's important for you and what it isn't. So I'm wondering, what are the things that are really important for a company? What components should you own when you're starting the first time? What kind of critical components would those be in your view?
So I think I'll answer briefly from the research perspective, and it'd be interesting to hear what you're seeing from clients. I would say the answer is it very much depends on the business model and the content model and the market for each of those platforms. So I think when you're starting out, platforms, streaming services have got to have an idea of the business model and the point of differentiation in the market. And that's the bit that they should own, and whether they own that through internal development or through picking the right technology partner to deliver that. I think what we see all of the time, we were just discussing that before, we both get this, we see as streaming services coming to us and saying, which technology should we choose? And you know, when we're talking to them about that, the answer is, well, which markets do you want to serve? What are the business models you may want to use? What kind of content do you want to have in that market? What distribution partners and pay TV partners do you want to be on in that market? So I would say the first step is actually not a technological one, it's a business one. It's what is the business going to look like? Do the work on where the audience is for that particular service, where the niche is in the market that you want to explore. And then that starts to answer the technological questions, because it helps you understand which of the partners you may want to work with. You can then come to Nuno at Kaltura and say, well, here's what I'm trying to do, can you help me?
Yeah, so usually the way I would start a conversation like that with a customer is just tell me your story. So everyone tells me I want an OTT platform, and that tells me absolutely nothing, because I sell OTT platforms, so most people who talk to me want to buy an OTT platform. So, and what I ask is, what's the story? And the story can be, has the plush story, but it can be like we've had customers in India who say, I'm a broadcaster, I have a very established practice of advertising, and I'm very strong in reality TV. The problem is I get voting in reality TV, and today 3/4 of that money goes to the telecom operator, and I want to move that voting from numbers to press a button in an app, and I capture 100% of the revenue and I multiply by 4x that revenue stream. And that, if you ask me, is Kaltura going to develop a way for the specificities in India of voting? We're not. Because the chances that I'll find multiple players in the market, the multiple customers who have the exact same need under the same circumstances is very low. But that's the key story for him. So a conversation about what you should or shouldn't build is always around, what's your story? What's your differentiator? Why are you doing this? So do you want to make money with advertising? Do you want to move away from YouTube, Vimeo monetization models? Do you want to, for the first time, sell ads? Some people, for the first time, they want to sell ads. Okay, so put your whole teams in ad integrations, put your whole teams in extending ad tech stacks to connect to your specific DSP that's critical in your market. So to run yourself the ad decision server if you think that, or your private market if that. So the story is always, in the end, how are you going to get users? How are you going to get them engaged? How are you going to make money? Yep. So, and some of these layers are, the foundations are all common and we can put them in place, but the one you really need to control is the key success factor for you.
Thank you. Any other questions? One over here. Thank you.
Hello. Just following your answer, I would like to know how can we? I'm an OTT product manager, and how can we evaluate the platforms so not closed, and that can be capability of to be flexible, and how can you evaluate when we are trying to buy some new technology that it could help us to improve our business model during the time?
Well, I think the need for flexibility is key. That's one of the factors that we identified. So I think it's a really crucial part of any technology decision. How, as a technology provider, how could you demonstrate to someone that you have that openness, that they can extend on it, and they're not going to be stuck where you saying, "Oh, I'm not going to support that"?
So there are 2 or 3 ways to do it. I think the first thing is, the first filter I would put through is to say, is innovation you're looking for specific or generic? If it's generic, so it's something that everyone in the market would benefit from, it's likely we're going to bring it to you, and the conversation is more of how fast. So that is going back to my point around agility in bringing roadmap, and are you in a business model where your incentive and mine are aligned to the extent that you have not paid me a license 3 years ago and then you barely get me to pick up the phone, but where your success and your subscribers, the more and more you have of them, are actually driving my business. So that would be more. If you want something very specific, the way to make sure it's flexible, and I'm thinking, for example, in cases where we've had customers who want to do sports metadata augmentation, but which is a generic need in the world, and there's a very good providers. But they want to use the specific same partner that is supporting them on producing their own channel. And in that case, what we say is, here's a set of open API that are documented, that you can, has anyone in our development community just tap into. Here's the environment that came as part of your subscription where you guys can play. You can break, you can do whatever you want, but you're getting to developer world. So there are 2 different things, right? So one is a product world, which is, we'll solve your you don't need to worry about the technological problem. We will solve your business need. And that is the product definition. And you want to be in product roadmaps. So that's what really cracks the scalability and the issue. But at the same time, when you want to be flexible, you're in the platform world, you're in the development world. You want to say, when you say I want to be flexible, what it means is I want to put my sleeves up and put my hands, and I want to partner myself to be able to tap into that. And that goes back to my original point is, you cannot choose. A lot of people today choose pure products. Let's say, I'll put my credit card in Vimeo or in some of these new players online that essentially just will do everything online. You put a credit card, you never worry about it. And then it sounds great, you launch in a week, and then what you say is, okay, now I want to change this. And the answer is impossible, because we're not a platform, we're a product. We're a product. This is what you get. This is what you paid for. It's fantastic. You launched. You should be happy. You have all these features, but I don't want that one. I want another one. For us, our definition of success and our unique pitch to the industry is we came from the platform world where everything was flexible, but we were only suited to address the largest of needs, the largest telcos in the world. What we've been putting a significant effort to is to turn that platform into a product that if you're not one of the largest companies in the world in terms of media and telecom, you can benefit from the exact same capabilities with a non-existing entry cost through a product approach, okay? But it's not one or the other, and I have this conversation with analysts all the time. It's not as we're going from platform to product. That's a naive way of looking at the market, because your needs are what you described, is for the things you don't care, you don't want to control, and you just want to make sure they work, here's the product, go to market quickly, benefit from our scale experience. You want to be able to customize and build on top, here's the platform approach. Here are the APIs, the flexibility, go ahead and have fun building on top of that. And that's sort of where I think this balance of the whole debate around build versus buy needs to sit.
Good. Thank you. I think we've got time for one or two more questions briefly.
Hi, my question to Nano is, as OTT providers look to globally expand and differentiate not just on content, but also on the platform technologies, how do you take advantage of localization, platform features changes that are in different market based on that? And how does your customer come back with that problem statement upfront? So that makes a decision between whether we build or buy on a global scale.
So I've seen that happen in 2 different ways. One way has been they expand based on, let's call it a plain vanilla or a globalist view, where they expand and they just say, we had this experience, and we had them on stage, not sure right here, but with KCP, with Cocoa, with one of our customers. And the first step of expansion is typically you pick up your homegrown service and you just expand it. And that requires a set of partnerships and capabilities that we can offer, but they're specific to the markets you want to expand to, but not specific to your business in those markets. Going back to Robert's point about building gateways. It might seem obvious, for example, but you would understand that half the pure productized cloud providers would not allow you to charge in anything but US dollars. Or wouldn't allow you to charge with anything but a credit card. And I'm not sure if, I'm sure the audience is overwhelmingly American, but you wouldn't be overwhelmingly surprised to hear that most people do not have US credit cards in the rest of the world. So that's a relatively small problem, is a complete impediment to a global expansion if you've selected a platform that only operates only operates within this parameter set. So I would say the first step of this is this: you need to choose a partner that is global ready by day one. That if you ask them, are you integrated with the top 3 billing gateways in India? The answer needs to be yes. If someone says, I'm doing Stripe, it's not a problem, you run away from the room. Because, yeah, Stripe is global, but have you seen how much it costs? Have you seen if people use it in that segment? So if someone tells you, I have a flexible architecture and I onboard a billing gateway in 3 days, and by the way, I challenge you to find a market where I don't have the top 3. That's your global partner, okay? So, and that problem is particularly a very American-centric problem to what I've seen, which is there are a lot of very successful players here in the local market who have zero ability to serve international needs. And we've seen a lot of partners who want to export content from the US, leveraging on this powerhouse of content production, that then are just frustrated by the inability to do basic stuff. The second element is more subtle, and it connects to the flexibility, which is I really have no clue of what's a success element to sell Urdu language content in Urdu communities that are outside of the 2 or 3 largest countries. I do not know. I do not know how to segment them. I do not know how to address them. I do not. But you will know before you launch or after you launch. And then when it comes to, am I going to build the specific enablers for this? I'm not. But maybe you have a partner who's a local partner who can do. Or maybe you have, and that is where the shift moves from a globalist partner to a flexible platformic approach that can serve your needs, okay? But you're not going to get it right just to manage expectations. I haven't seen anyone get it right off the bat. What I have seen is people who get it wrong and have a huge cost of course correction, and people who get it wrong and have an easy path of course correction. And in some cases, I've seen platforms being replaced by topics that my team left off, because it's how is it possible that someone's moving off because US dollar billing, or they can't just expose an API to do this. While I've seen people who face problems that seem unsurmountable, and a simple configuration change, because our commerce engine, for example, is super open, and because we have this API approach, that a problem that was stated as, this is a deal-breaking problem for us to enter some market, it's just immediately resolved.
I think we're about at the end of our allotted time. If you've got any other questions that you want to ask one-to-one at the end, I'm sure, Nuno, you'll be happy to.
I'll stick around.
Stop. So, but thank you. I hope you found that useful. As I say, if you'd like to download the report and read a little bit more, just Google for Secrets of Streaming Success Kaltura. That will bring up the download link.
Very short.
Checked. That was easier than trying to type the URL. But Nuno Sanchez from Kaltura, thank you so much for joining us here and sharing your thoughts. And
Robert, thank you very much for having us.
Some great questions.
Thank you all for your time. Thank you.